A number of years ago, while I was on sabbatical, I stayed at a friend's house in Montana for a month. And this house was just a few miles from the Gallatin River and not too far away from another river in Montana called the Madison River. If you've ever seen Robert Redford's film adaptation of Norman Maclean's book, A River Runs Through It, then you are familiar with the Gallatin River. The majority of the fishing scenes in A River Runs Through It were filmed right there on the Gallatin. And it was funny, as I got to Montana, I didn't know anything about fly fishing. But one of the things I discovered is that they don't, when they talk about rivers, oftentimes they don't refer to rivers as far as like their water flow or their width or their depth, but they measure rivers by fish per mile. The Gallatin, for instance, depending on the season, will have 2,500 to 3,000 fish per mile. The Madison River, I just checked today, is registering about 3,300 fish per mile on the Madison River right now. And as I went to Montana, I didn't know anything about fly fishing. I didn't know anything about how many fish were in a river per mile. But I figured that since I was going to be in this beautiful place and I didn't have anything really to do but be in this beautiful place, that I would do my best Brad Pitt impersonation and figure out how to stand in a river and catch some of these fish that I saw them catching in that movie, A River Runs Through It. And as I began to prepare for this time that I was going to have in Montana, I just started reading some books about fly fishing. And the first one I coincidentally read was I picked up Norman Maclean's book, A River Runs Through It. And I loved the opening of the book because it spoke richly to my Presbyterian heart. This is how he begins the book. Norman Maclean writes, "In our family, there was no clear line between religion and fly fishing. We lived at the junction of great trout rivers in western Montana, and our father was a Presbyterian minister and a fly fisherman who tied his own flies and taught others. He told us about Christ's disciples being fishermen, and we were left to assume, as my brother and I did, that all first-class fishermen on the Sea of Galilee were fly fishermen, and that John, the favorite, was a dry fly fisherman." That was kind of my he had me at hello moment. I'm like, I'm going to love this book. The most famous fly fishing book ever written was written by a guy named Isaac Walton in 1653. It's called The Complete Angler. It sold more copies than any other fishing book ever written. And for a time, it was the second most published book in the whole entire world, next to the Bible. But in that book is where I learned that in Old English, a fishing hook was simply referred to as an angle. And Walton, in his book, The Complete Angler, referred to fishermen as brothers of the angle. This is where we get the term angling from. This is why we call fishermen anglers. And the title of this material, Working the Angle, is about learning how to fish for people, about applying fishing principles to how it is we understand what it means that Christ has commended us to fish for people. It's about evangelism. And that term evangelism is a word that simply means good newsing. It's about good newsing, sharing the hope of the gospel of Jesus Christ with people who need to hear it. And I think for many, and perhaps for most Christians, the thought of that is just intimidating. I mean, you might even be hearing this now thinking like, some things run through our mind, right? I don't know enough to talk about that. I mean, what if they ask me questions that I don't have the answer to? I don't think it's my place to infringe my beliefs on someone else's beliefs, or we might just fear the idea of rejection. Like, what if they just outright don't like what I'm saying? I had a man tell me a couple weeks ago, I asked him, are you going to come to this class? And he said, well, no, it's not really for people like me. I said, what do you mean it's not for people like you? He said, I think that people like you should do this. And I think he was saying, and he's a believer, he's a Christian, he was just saying like, I'm just a normal Christian. And I think he thinks that certain Christians are uniquely gifted to share the gospel. And then there's just the rest of us. In fishing, there's a term for men or women who seem to have a particular ability to catch fish. You can be standing in the same river as them, using the same fly as them, standing in the same saltwater flat as them, using the same fly patterns as them, and they just catch more fish than you two. The term used to describe these super annoying people, the term used is fishy. They just call them fishy. They'll say, well, he's fishy or she's fishy. It just means that they are comparatively successful. They just know how to catch fish. I was talking with a friend recently about how I'd gotten back from a fly fishing trip in Belize. And I went with a guy who was real fishy, and it was so annoying. We spent the same amount of money and the same amount of time to go, and he caught a lot more fish than me. And I was lamenting with another friend of mine about how annoying it was to fish with this guy in Belize this whole time. And this guy was a mutual friend. And he said, well, you know, Scott, he has spent thousands of hours on the water. Being fishy really isn't magic. It's about putting time in more than anything else. Proficiency is earned. It's about time. The man who taught me how to tie my own fishing flies always says often, signs his emails off, there is no substitute for time on the water. There's no substitute for time on the water. You only will get better by doing it. You'll become a better fisherman by fishing. When Jesus called Peter and Andrew and James and John from the shores of Galilee that day away from their fishing boats, he said, follow me and I will teach you how to catch people. Follow me, that is, watch, listen, learn, abide in me, and I will make you fishers of men. They were not naturals. It was a learned skill taught by the master himself. My first fishing lesson in Montana, that summer I was there, didn't turn out to be a lesson about fishing at all. I'd arranged to meet with a man who had been fishing the Gallatin River and its tributaries for about 20 years. And he said, meet me in this parking lot and we'll get together and I'll kind of walk you through the ropes. And I'd never done it, but I had all the gear, right? I mean, I'd spent, money, and I had the waders and the boots, and it was all just sparkling brand new gear. And I was so excited. I got all this gear and I get to this parking lot. And I don't know if you've ever seen a grown man hurry up to try to put on waders. It's embarrassing. It doesn't. And so then, these fly rods, they come in 4 pieces. And so I'm trying to piece it together just right, stick the reel on and run the fly rod through and tie leaders on and all this stuff. I was so excited to go fishing. And all of a sudden I'm just scrambling. It just looked like a hot mess in this parking lot. And I just feel a hand on my shoulder. And he says, Scott, the first lesson you need to learn about fly fishing is that there's nothing fast about fly fishing. There's nothing fast about it. Dallas Willard, who has contributed wonderfully in his writing and teaching in the area of spiritual formation, was asked to describe Jesus in one word. He thought for a moment and said, relaxed. There was a patient purposefulness and intentionality with Jesus, but no haste. We don't see him hurrying to anything. And I do think as we begin this journey of learning to fish for people together, we would do well to remember that there's nothing fast about fly fishing. It's patient, it's purposeful, it's intentional, but it's not fast. And the same is true in learning to fish for people. It moves at the speed of God's sovereign design, no slower, no faster. And ultimately, it's about being mastered by him. Follow me, and you will learn to do this. It's about Jesus shaping us for this purpose. We will learn to fish for people as we follow him. And Jesus is, as Dallas Willard observed, quite relaxed in the whole process of shaping us to be fishers of men. Eventually, and it took a couple of years, Jesus's apostles did learn to fish for people. In fact, Peter's first sermon in the book of Acts saw 3,000 people come to repentance and acknowledgement of Jesus as Lord. That's a pretty good fishing day. And under the leadership of the apostles, the church there in Jerusalem grew exponentially. As a matter of fact, in Acts 2 records that in this very first Christian community that the Lord added to their number day by day those who were being saved. God kept on adding people to the church through the ministry and witness of its people. That's effective fishing. That is this multiplication that Jesus was talking about. And it's easy to look at these apostles and think, well, I'm not like them. I haven't walked with Jesus and spent these years with Jesus in this tangible way like they did. Or to look at a ministry of a guy like Billy Graham and to think like, well, I can't do that. I can't be them. And the truth is, we're right? If we look at people through whom God works in regard to volume, it would be easy, like my friend said a few weeks ago, to just leave it to the professionals. Well, the fascinating thing in the book of Acts that we read is that these apostles of Jesus were teaching and training these men and women who became the church in Jerusalem. And they began to teach them just like Jesus had taught them. And Jesus had trained his apostles to become fishers of people, and these apostles were training thousands of nameless, ordinary Christians to do the same. And some years after this first church in Jerusalem was established and grew, persecution struck. That the church had grown so rapidly that it had become a problem to leaders in and around Jerusalem. And the apostles, it says, remained in Jerusalem to support and help the church in these turbulent times, but many ordinary, everyday followers of Jesus began to flee and leave Jerusalem. They just began to leave because the persecution was so intense. And you want to know what happened? Acts 8 records this. It says, and there arose a great persecution against the church in Jerusalem, and they were all scattered throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria, except the apostles, meaning the apostles stayed in Jerusalem. The church members fled through Judea and Samaria, and those who were scattered about went on preaching the word. Those who scattered, normal, ordinary, everyday people whose names we don't know, faces we wouldn't recognize, went about preaching the word. The good news of Jesus went into the world beyond the city of Jerusalem because normal, everyday Christians, people like you and me, began to share the good news wherever they went. Jesus had taught his apostles how to fish for people. The apostles taught the early church how to fish for people. And the church burst the bounds of the city in which it was contained because ordinary, everyday people began to fish for other people. And we're sitting in here in part today because ordinary people learned to share the extraordinary good news about God's love for the world. No one is a natural fly fisherman. It is a challenging art that defies natural proficiency. In the same way, sharing the gospel is a learned skill. It's a learned skill that we acquire as we are being mastered by Jesus, because he was the light of the world. He could say to those who belong to him, you too are the light of the world. Jesus caught 4 fishermen on the shores of Galilee one day and determined to train them how to catch people, just like he had taught them. About a year after I had become a Christian in college, a guy came by the campus bookstore where I worked for my work-study job, and I didn't know him, but he said, man, could you come by my dorm room a little bit later? And I was like, yeah, sure, got his dorm room, and I completely forgot. Didn't do it. Next day, he comes by the bookstore again where I'm working, and he seems a little agitated. He's like, I thought you were going to come by my dorm room last night. I was like, oh, yeah, man, my bad. I'm sorry. I'll come by tonight. But to be honest, the way he was agitated made me a little nervous. I wasn't sure if I wanted to come that night. Anyway, I decided I'm going to come by his dorm room, and so I knock on the door, come in, and he says to me, he says, man, I was with that group of guys you were talking to the other day, telling the story about how you became a Christian. And he said, I want to become a Christian too. I just don't know how to do it. How do I become a Christian? That's pretty cool, right? Only I didn't know what to tell him. I fumbled around trying to explain things. I didn't, it happened to, I didn't know how to talk about it. I didn't know how to like walk him through what I had come through a year before. I was trying not to forget anything. I thought I can't mess this up. And it was like a casserole of, and y'all know how I feel about casseroles. It was just a casserole of just confusing things, of everything that possibly came to my mind being dumped in front of this guy in this room. I literally had no idea what I was doing. But that man became a follower of Jesus that night because, and we need to remember this, God is the one who ultimately catches people. I was in Montana. I'd gotten proficient enough to park my truck on a road and walk into a river and do my best at catching fish. Still relatively new to it. So I'm in the middle of, I want you to picture me as Brad Pitt in the middle of the Gallatin River. And I had made a whole mess of this monofilament leader that was on the end of my fly line. And it was just this bird's nest and so I'm sitting there in the middle of this river trying to untie this fly line. And I pull the fly through this little loop and I throw it into the river. And all of a sudden this knot just rips out of my hand. I hadn't caught a fish all day. And the one I caught was mere happenstance while I'm trying to untangle this line. And the truth is, it wasn't my skill. But I was standing in the river and I had a rod in my hand because I was determined to become a fisherman. And there's no substitution for time on the water. The only way we fail in fishing for people is by not fishing. Ultimately, our efforts in sharing the gospel with people will be successful because God loves them. My friend Philip came to know Jesus that night because God loved him enough to have a guy like me fumble his way through it. I felt like I was untangling a knot the whole time, and within that mess, he heard the voice of Jesus. I was in Scotland recently, and I had arranged to meet up with a fishing guide on the Isle of Skye. They call fishing guides in Scotland and Ireland gillies because they're kind of naturalists. And this idea is that they're kind of a spirit guide into the natural world. And so my gillie, Danny, took me on the Isle of Skye to a small brown trout lake kind of near the middle of the island of Skye. And he taught me a fishing technique I'd never used before called short lining. And we spent all day in a little rowboat together. And as I got to know him throughout the day, I just began to talk to him about fishing and life. And I asked, at one point, I asked his opinion on what it takes to become a successful fisherman. What does it take, man, to do this well? And we're going to show you a clip that was part of his answer to me.
And the last thing, particularly with salmon fishing, or any type of fishing, I think you've got to be obsessed, completely obsessed, because fishing can be a bit of a life occupation for a lot of people, you know, where people get lots of different things from it. But you'll find again that, you know, the people that do really well, if catching fish is most important to you, just because they're obsessed. They're good casters and they know the water like the back of their hand. That is essentially, for me, the things that are really key. Definitely, you know, and I admit to being totally obsessed. You know, I spend the whole winter complaining about being indoors. Even when the weather's rotten, it's like, man, I just can't wait for fishing season. You know, I'll be out in January, mid-January in Scotland when salmon season opens, and there's not a lot of fish about in Scotland at that time, but I guarantee you I'll be out there.
How cold is it in mid-January?
It can be really cold. There can be times when like your rod rings are freezing up, you know, and there might not be any fish in the pools. You know, you're really, your chances are quite low. But I don't care. I'll still be out there.
You're obsessed.
Obsessed.
Yeah.
You know, totally obsessed.
What does it take to be a successful angler? Obsessed. Completely obsessed. As we begin this journey together, we need to consider the fact that many of us don't share Jesus with people because we don't feel about people the same way God does. John 3:16, of course, Jesus famously tells Nicodemus that God so loved the world that he sent his only Son, that whoever believes in him will not perish but would have eternal life. God loves the world, and he loves us. And it's a love that's higher and deeper and wider than we could possibly fully comprehend. A love enough to send a Son to save sinners at the cost of his own life. God so loved, so he sent. And at the end of Jesus' ministry, at the end of the Gospel of John in John chapter 20, Jesus looks at these men he's been teaching to fish for people. And he said, "As the Father sent me, so I am sending you." The Father sent the Son in love. The Son sends us in that same love. We must become obsessed with the thought of people coming to know the love of God for them. We must become consumed with the thought of people experiencing the love of God. It should bother us. When I was talking to Danny, I could tell it bothered him that there were fish in Scotland that existed that he wasn't catching. He was completely obsessed. And I think when we are bothered by the fact that there are people wandering lost and hurting who don't know the love of God, when we become obsessed and burdened with that thing, that's when we'll begin to understand with the heart of God what it means to be obsessed with God's love for the world in such a way that we are motivated to learn how to become fishers of people. We must become obsessed with the thought of people coming to know the love of God for them. We need to be praying, I think, Lord, help me see the world the way you see it. Help me love people the way that you love them. This needs to be our prayer. Lord, put in me a greater burden for the fact that people don't know you and they need to. And in seeing the world with God's love, it is a good thing to become completely obsessed in our pursuit of those that he loves. So why do this? Why fish for people? Well, because God loved them enough to send his Son to save them. And his Son loved them enough to send us to tell them about it. God so loved, so he sent his Son. The Son so loved, so he sends his people. When we begin to enjoy the beautiful burden of God's obsession for saving people and redeeming people who don't know him, then we will learn the first part of what it means to become workers of the angle, successful fishermen as we do the work of Christ in the world.